2009 as a trustee on the board of, sorry, uh, and the board,
Talk about fancy schmancy.
the board of directors of Rotary Foundation. Carolyn's recent Rotary activities include member and chair, RI Constitution and Bylaw.
I gotta reinstall Microsoft Office.
I'm gonna mute everybody. Joellen, you'll have to put yourself back on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So do you have the information?
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
So let's see. She was RI Constitution and Bylaws Committee on that committee, member, Council on Legislation Operations Committee, chair 2013 and 14 of the Rotary Foundation Peace Centers Committee, member 2011 RI Convention Committee, Convention Promotions Committee for New Orleans, moderator 2010 Rotary Regional Foundation Coordinator Institute, vice chair 2015 the Rotary Foundation Peace Symposium held in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She is the immediate past chair of the Rotary Action Group for Peace, and she received the Rotary Service Above Self and Rotary Foundation's Distinguished Service Award, as well as the Anchorage East Rotary 2009 Lifetime Achievement Award. The Alaska Bar Association's Distinguished Service Award, and the Making a Difference for Women Award from Seroptimus International of Anchorage. She was named the Volunteer of the Year by the Russian Children's Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Moscow, Russia. The Alaska State Legislature recognized her for her accomplishments, and the Tomsk, Russia Duma legislature gave her the Mercy and Charity Award for her humanitarian work on behalf of the children in the Tomsk region. In 2012, Carolyn was inducted into the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame. Carolyn was one of 10 women in the U.S. recognized at the White House as a Rotary Woman of Action in October 2014. And most recently, she was named the Athena International recipient of the 2015 Athena Leadership Award by the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce. Carolyn has traveled to Russia 33 times in her service to Rotary, 5 of those trips as a Rotary volunteer. Her story, The Children of Russia, was published in the July 2002 issue of the Rotarian and in Chicken Soup for the Volunteer's Soul. Carolyn has 2 adult daughters, Nina and Carrie, but no grandchildren. She loves to fish for salmon, hike Alaska's many trails, see the world, and count the stars in the bottom of her champagne glass. Please welcome Carolyn Jones.
Carol, you have to unmute yourself.
Mute.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Joellen, for that extravagant introduction. Did I send you that bio? I try not to send that one out anymore because it's too long. Okay, well, anyway, thank you for inviting me and giving me this chance to just tell you my personal story and my personal thoughts, all triggered by events of last year. It was May 25th, 2020, when 17-year-old Darnella Frazier, a Black female in Minneapolis, Minnesota, stood her ground and with nothing more than a cell phone, unflinchingly recorded the murder of George Floyd, a Black male being subdued by a cop pinning his knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. During that time, Floyd cried he couldn't breathe. He called out to his deceased mother. Onlookers pleaded with the officer to remove his knee as Floyd couldn't breathe. During that time, the officer even looked up and looked directly at the young lady and into the camera. He was unmoved, and George Floyd died. It has been over 60 years since America's Blacks began protesting for racial equality. I'm old enough to remember 1955, when Rosa Parks, a tired Black woman in Alabama, boarded a bus, sat in the front seat, and refused to yield when a white passenger demanded his right. The Montgomery bus boycott followed for over a year, and is regarded as the first large-scale U.S. demonstration against segregation. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court declared segregated busing to be a violation of our Constitution. I still remember the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-in, a civil rights protest in 1960, when young African-American students staged a sit-in at a segregated lunch counter at Woolworth's Five and Dime store. Though arrested for their conduct, the protest had a lasting impact nationwide and forced Woolworths and other stores to alter their racist practices. And I can never forget 1965, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led thousands of nonviolent demonstrators to the steps of the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, after a 5-day, 54-mile march from Selma to peacefully protest the lack of voting rights for African Americans, thus leading to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. At the same time, I remember living happily, safely, securely in Trieste, Italy, where I was the only person of color in the entire town, and the townspeople were thrilled that I was there. Like the sitcom Cheers, everybody knew my name. The Triestines loved me. Yet instead of hunkering down there in my safe cocoon, I came home in 1967 because my country was burning and I wanted to be home, to be a part of the solution. In my small way, I tried to do my part as a legal services poverty lawyer in California and later as a human rights lawyer in Alaska. Over time, I actually believed I saw progress, that I saw change. Until the evening of May 25th, 2020, when Darnella Frazier risked her own safety and the entire world saw the truth about how George Floyd died. And I thought, oh crap. Over 60 years have passed and nothing has changed. It's still too true that a few rogue police officers around the US continue to abuse, injure, and even murder Black people, and usually without accountability. But I am wrong about one thing: something has changed. Darnella's quick thinking and courage changed the course of history in this country and sparked a new, more diverse movement than 50 plus years ago. Back in the late 50s and 60s, the people marching for peace and justice were almost all Black. But this time, all America is protesting. In one city, a line of middle-aged white women linked arms and stood in front of the protesters as a shield against the line of law enforcement. In another city, the whites marching outnumbered the people of color. A massive Black Lives Matter protest was held in Nashville and organized by 6 white and Black teenage girls who met online and wanted to honor the memory of George Floyd. And a 9-year-old little girl, white girl in Ohio, gave an impassioned speech at a Black Lives Matter movement protest and said that Black Lives Matter. If I can figure this out, why can't you? Researchers say these protests, now in their 8th month, are the largest in US history, having spread to well over 650 cities and towns across all 50 states. We have seen a real and meaningful change in public opinion on racial issues and policing. The sports world has a huge platform in this country and is speaking out at every level. 70 members of the Denver Broncos football staff and team led thousands in a protest march to the state capitol. The NFL commissioner now endorses peaceful protests by the players. San Antonio Spurs basketball coach Greg Popovich has called on white people to call out racism, no matter the consequences. Coach K, Duke University Blue Devils basketball college team, said, Black Lives Matter is not a political issue, it's a human rights issue.
Jack Roscoe down in the bottom right.
Excuse me?
Oh, I'm sorry.
The Southeastern Conference Commissioner announced that championship college sports events would not be held in the state of Mississippi until the Confederate flag emblem was removed from the state flag. Months later, Mississippi now has a new state flag sporting a magnolia flower. The University of Illinois' football team changed their helmets to include messages of social justice and a black fist. NASCAR doesn't fly the Confederate flag at its car races. And most recently, Major League Baseball has recognized the Negro Baseball League that played from 1920 to 1948 because Blacks were not allowed in Major League Baseball. Those achievements and the statistics of that league are now a part of Major League Baseball history. It genuinely feels like a national racial reckoning is extending well beyond the sports world. Disney is retheming Splash Mountain's amusement ride because of the racial overtones. HBO pulled the film classic Gone with the Wind to add historical context. NASA, our National Space Agency, renamed its headquarters after Mary Jackson. You may recognize the name. She was the heroine in the movie Hidden Figures and the agency's first African-American female engineer. Princeton University is renaming its residential college Woodrow Wilson after a Black female alumna and donor in rejection of Wilson's promotion of segregation and support of the KKK. And how about that little US state just east of Connecticut? I'll bet you didn't know that until last year, the full official name of that state was the State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Last year, the voters voted finally to remove the words "and Providence Plantations," and now it is merely and simply and rightly the State of Rhode Island. Since these protests began, you have seen genuine and sincere movement and action to examine and change disrespectful and racist names of sports teams. Today, the NFL team in our nation's capital is known only as the Washington football team. The Major League Baseball team in Cleveland is also removing its Native American name. We're rejecting and changing the racist images in our marketing on our pancake box, pancake syrup label, rice box, ice cream bar, butter packaging, and even one insurance company. We're removing racist symbolism from public places, such as the statues of Confederate generals who were racist or slave owners, the names of Confederate generals for military bases. Even the long-time name Dixie is being abandoned by country western singers, a beer label, and a university. Countless businesses, organizations, and individuals have finally stepped up and issued written statements condemning racism. Even Rotary issued its own statement on racism in June and followed with establishing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And this change in the air is not just in the US. The whole world has been protesting with us. Formula One race car drivers at the Austrian Grand Prix were wearing shirts that read "End Racism," and they took a knee. BTS, the Korean boy band, contributed $1 million to the Black Lives Matter movement and asked its fans to match, and the fans did it. Last July, the city of Paris inaugurated a public garden honoring Solitude. She was a pregnant freed slave who was jailed for her activities to liberate slaves on the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe. She gave birth in jail and was executed the following day. And last December, the French and Turkish soccer players walked out of a match in Paris after accusing a referee of making a racist remark. The game continued only after a new set of officials was set in. Today's civil rights movement does not remember the civil rights movement I remember of the 1960s. Today, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of white people have taken to the streets, thousands of whom have been tear gassed, beaten, or chased down by the police. Perhaps not coincidentally, there's never been a moment when the authorities like school boards, city councils, mayors seem so willing to embrace policies that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. These changes are a reflection that white America in increasing numbers is finally waking up. But we are not done until we tackle the harder stuff, institutional or systemic racism, too long a normal practice within our society. It has led to discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, to name a few. Tackling these issues means getting justice for George Floyd and those who went before and after him, dead at the hands of excessive police force. Tackling those issues means leveling the educational playing field and ensuring that minority and disadvantaged children have equal access to an education that can lift them up. Tackling these issues means equal employment opportunities. So Rotarians, I want to toss out a few examples of how you, as Rotarians, can make a difference. In the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on one of those issues where institutional racism should be addressed and where you can make a difference. Education, and especially in these pandemic times. Distance learning is producing a lost generation of kids and deepening the divide between rich and poor. Just consider the impact of pandemic-related school closings and distance learning on disadvantaged children. Many minorities are low-income parents who need to work, not stay home and teach. They may even lack the academic background suited to teach kids. Parents may speak English as a second language or not at all. They may not have the money to afford the internet or a computer, or maybe they only have one for several kids to compete for. They may not be adequate space in the home for even a quiet work area. These already disadvantaged children are falling further behind with this loss of education. Think about it. How do you recover a lost half year or year? Do you ever? So my suggestion is you pick a school in a low-income neighborhood, ask the principal what are the needs, possibly. A reading program, volunteer tutors, books, backpacks, computer tablets, an after-school tutoring program partnered with the Boys and Girls Club. How about flashcards, educational toys, finger puppets of diverse historical figures for classrooms and school libraries? And if you had the opportunity to watch the inauguration, you couldn't help be impressed by a 22-year-old Black female, Amanda Gorman, who read her poem written especially for the inauguration. Her books, The Hill We Climb and Change Things, will be published in September of 2021. How about giving copies to the school libraries or providing video recordings of her delivery at the inauguration? You could recognize special educators, a teacher of the month named who inspires minority kids or who's a role model for minority kids, who teaches respect for diversity in the classroom. Finance or chaperone a class for a field trip to a local museum or something similar. Designate an annual scholarship as encouragement or motivation for a kid who may not have the best grades, but has demonstrated an effort to turn his or her life around and could use your little bit of extra support. And on a personal note, how about you're buying dolls, toys, books, choosing TV shows and movies for your grandkids and your kids that show people from different races, religions, nationalities? And if you're in the position to do so, make the historically Black college and university or the American Indian College Fund beneficiaries through your will. If you change the life of a little child, remember Carolyn. I was once that little child. President Holder's Rotary theme for this year is Rotary Opens Opportunities. Here's your opportunity to back up words and conversation with action to eradicate racism, secure justice, build peace. More than that, I'm offering you the opportunity to be on the right side of history as Rotarians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. That was great. So folks, if you want to go ahead and unmute, I just put that out there. I think we have a respectful enough group and small enough group that we can just raise a hand and I will acknowledge you to ask a question. Don't be shy. With two screenfuls of people, it might take me a second to see you.
Judy
So
Steiner, Evan. Judy.
okay, Judy.
Hi, I'm living in Cooperstown, and I wanted to say that if anyone wanted to come to the Baseball Hall of Fame to see the exhibit of Black baseball teams, it's a wonderful exhibit, and we would welcome you as Cooperstonians to come and see that exhibit. So thank you, and thank you for the talk.
Yeah.
I hope to get there one day, Judy.
Well, call me.
I will.
I'll put you up and give you a tour. As I used to give bus tours to children when I'm teaching, so I could tell you about it.
Okay, it's a deal.
Okay, thank you.
I was sorry, Judy, to see that this year you're not going to induct anybody in the Baseball Hall of Fame. It was in the paper tonight.
Yeah, well, I tried.
Yeah.
Very good.
Other questions for Carolyn? Don't be shy. Go ahead, Patricia, Pat.
Oh, good evening. Thank you, Carolyn. Actually, I'm a superintendent of a small, poor rural school district, and I would have to agree with everything that you said. Our Rotary Club has been kind enough to, in New York, by the way, and I was, as a young adult in Anchorage, Alaska, spent about a half a year living there, but didn't stay like you did. It's a wonderful place. But, you know, our Rotary Club, helped us by, and also our community, by giving our school district gift cards to our local grocery store. And we provide food 7 days a week for our students. But there are things that parents need and families need in addition to that. So that, along with other community members, people have donated their refund checks from the government. And we just go to our local grocery store and buy gift cards. And then when parents who come to get food that might be working remotely, we send kids food home on the weekends, but we tuck away, you know, to the families that we know are needing the most those gift cards to the grocery store, and they're able to buy hygiene products and some of those other things.
Okay.
Those are some of the things that we found families really do lack: laundry detergent, hygiene products, and some of our churches do donate those kinds of things. So it is very, even donating Kajits, which is hotspots for kids who live
Okay.
in areas where they don't have internet access. Those are fairly significant investments for schools, and very well needed to bridge that gap between the students who have robust internet and lots of, you know, all of our students get devices through the school district, but the actual service at home is not equal whatsoever. So
So Pat, those
thank
are,
you. Well, I perked right up when you said education. So thank you.
Yeah.
so those are some additional good ideas for clubs. Dave Reynolds, I see your hand up there, Dave.
Yes, you did.
Go ahead.
I'm unmuted.
Great.
And welcome, Carolyn.
Hi, Dave.
And my question, I want to try to word it right, but it's not always possible. I'm a past district governor from the Sydney Club. And, you know, the year when you were made a director, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But what I'm trying to get right to is, how did you find interaction at among that group of Rotarians who are direct at that level in the organization, and how were you able to work with them
Mhm.
and make a better understanding of interactions?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Uh,
I wanted to word that carefully,
Yeah,
but I hope I got the point across.
no, I get it. Well, let me say, that any negatives or less than positive um, experiences that I had nothing to do with the color of my skin
Oh,
as a member of the trustees.
Carolyn, hang on a second. I'm going to mute everybody again. We're getting too much
Yeah,
background.
Thank you. Yes.
yeah, I'm having a hard time.
Yep. So go ahead and unmute yourself, Carolyn. Carolyn?
Okay, I did it. Okay.
All right.
The people who rise to the level of being directors or RI presidents, they've been doing it for a long time at a lot of different levels, and they've had a lot of exposure with Rotarians from all over the world, from all different countries, people of all different colors. And I say they get a real good lesson in learning tolerance and the importance of trying to get along, and recognizing that when you say put together a board of people that come from all over the world, you're going to have a lot of different views. And somehow you've all got to come up with a majority vote or better on just about everything you want to do if you're going to function. So color, it was not an issue. And um, I can't say if my gender was an issue, but I'll tell you one thing I do know was an issue: the fact that I was appointed to be a trustee straight from being a past district governor. Most trustees are past RI presidents or they are past RI directors. The rules don't require that, but the positions are so coveted that those upper echelon people are the ones that usually get rewarded with those positions. And once I was on the trustees, I noticed that there was this sort of pecking order in assignments, even in where you were seated at the dinner table. And I was at the bottom of the pecking order because I was a past district governor.
Interesting, interesting. So I did mute us all, but if you have a question, wave and unmute yourself and just speak up. Anybody?
While someone's thinking of a question, I have an answer to a question that hasn't been asked.
Okay.
And it may be that you're too polite. It's possible you all know the answer. However, there are times when someone has had the courage to say, "Why do you say Black Lives Matter? And why isn't it that my life doesn't matter?" And this is my personal answer. I'm not the expert on racism. I just know what I know and how I've lived and what I've experienced. I think when the people came up with the term Black Lives Matter, they made a mistake. It should have been Black Lives Matter, comma, TOO, TOO. Because the point of the label, the phrase, is not to exclude other people's importance, but to say, we're trying to say that when it comes to things like law enforcement and how we're treated, if we're running through a neighborhood jogging, or you stop us in our car, our lives are just as important, and we should be treated the same way that other people are. And we're not to such a point that there are law enforcement officers that kill us casually. I mean, after we had George Floyd, we had a man who was stopped. He was taken out of the car. He had 2 kids in the car. He went back to the car. I don't remember if he was getting a driver's license or what. He didn't get to the car. He was still outside the car. A police officer was holding his shirt with one arm and with his gun put 7 bullets in the man's back. There's no one can ever logically explain to me how that was okay. And if you want to know what institutional or systemic racism is, that's an example. I mean, that kind of conduct and that kind of pattern, and even maybe the thinking in that white police officer's mind, all has to do with the color of that man's skin.
I just want to say, to go along with that, it makes you wonder that 3 weeks ago, what happened at the Capitol steps, had most of the rioters been people of color, what would have happened? I suspect it'd be a lot of dead people.
Well, and not only that, but they pointed out the example of last year when there was a Black Lives Matter protest in DC. They had thousands of well-armed, well-equipped, well-dressed law enforcement standing almost shoulder to shoulder on the steps of the Capitol to protect it. Because, why? Because we're Black. So therefore, it's going to be some kind of racism, racial rioting. And as for this time around, what I said to you today, I wrote, and it came out of me as a result of George Floyd. And I rewrite it before every time I go to speak somewhere because something else has happened. This week, when I realized I was going to give this, I realized that I was writing about change and even trying to say there's hope. And after what happened on the 6th of January, you might say, well, how can you sound like a Pollyanna and sound so hopeful after what happened then? But I guess if I didn't have hope, I'd have despair. And I figure you can get more done with hope. But also, I want to tell you, because of what happened January 6th, what you do matters more than when I gave this speech last week or before January 6th.
Yeah.
Carolyn. So, um, a week ago, Monday, we had another Zoom meeting, kind of encompassing some of these same ideas, and someone spoke very well about white privilege. And I was having a conversation with one of my cousins back in September, and she didn't get it, right? And I don't know if you've got, I think that's something that I need to hear over and over and over again so that I can say those things to my white friends that say, well, no, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they grew up poor and they did this and they did that. And I'm like, yeah, but you were white. You know, there's a difference. And so, can you give us any words of wisdom so we can counteract some of those people that don't understand what white privilege is?
You know, I'm better able to just define systemic racism than I am white privilege. But I'll tell you, well, white privilege was on January 6th, because if you think about it, the acting chief of the Capitol Police yesterday testified and fell on her sword on behalf of the Capitol Police that they had been warned that there was a potential for violence. They had been told which groups were coming, and they knew some of those groups would not hesitate to be aggressive. And they had even, and they say they had even asked to someone to declare, I guess the Capitol Squad, there's a committee of 3 that make ultimate decisions, asked them to declare us an emergency, state of emergency, so that they could activate the guard, and that was denied. All of that, why was all of that happening, and why were they so unprepared? Because they didn't, I'm sorry, I please, no disrespect for those of you who on the line who are white, but that happened because they were white, and because the decision makers thought white people wouldn't do this.
Absolutely.
But if we came to DC, you know, they were ready for us. They were ready for us. And when when you had the march on the Capitol in the 60s, and Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, and that one was peaceful.
Any other folks?
Evan,
Yes.
Kim, Alan, I don't have a question, but I wanted to respond to the question about how do you talk with your friends about white privilege.
Good.
A book that I would recommend to you that maybe some of you have read, I'm currently reading. It's an interesting book to get through because for me, it reads very slowly because it has a lot of detail in it. And the name of the book is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkinson. And it talks about race as an aspect of a caste system in the United States. And she draws parallels between the caste system in the United States and the caste system in India and the caste system in Nazi Germany. And she goes back quite far in history. And I think it tells you something about white privilege. And one other thing that I'll mention that really made me pause is that during the time of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, when they were making some, the Nazi government was making some determinations of the privileges and the non-privileges that the Jewish people could have, and making a determination that they would not, they would condone intermarriage of someone with another person who was of the Jewish faith. Their model for that was the regulations in the 1930s, 1940s that the United States had as far as whether races could intermarry. And in fact, Nazi Germany decided that the policies in the United States were so stringent that they felt that they could not go as far as the United States went. So it's kind of interesting that some of the things that we condemn in the world have
Roots.
some roots in the United States.
That's it, Kim. That's
It's a very,
interesting.
very interesting book.
Yeah. I want to comment on that. I haven't read the book, and I saw one set of reviews that I read, and they kind of took the author to task and said that that analogy and the comparison to caste really isn't accurate and was sort of disingenuous towards the racist issues in the US. And I'm not knocking what you've said, but I think there's a lot of information out there, and any one of us could spend a lifetime educating ourselves. And you know, the lists of books and videos and movies is almost endless. So it can be a little overwhelming, a little daunting to try to take this on analytic or academically and understand it. That is a book I do want to look at myself, but these two reviewers were, and I wish I could remember where I saw it. But yeah, there's an awful lot out there, and some is excellent and some is mixed and some I don't know. But
This is Kate.
oh,
I know we want to be, you know, intellectual and have our information from places like books, but I think that this is exactly what we need to do, is listen to people who've lived and walked these stories, and then take to heart that if my neighbor is hurting, I can't say to them, well, you should just buck up and not hurt. If they have an idea that I have an experience that comes differently, then I think it's all of our duty to understand and listen. And I think that the reliance on books sort of tells us that we don't need to listen to our neighbors. And I would say we do. And I appreciate this this time we've had tonight to hear the stories. And I thought the presentation was very well. Carolyn, you had a very good presentation that was hopeful. I think that you spoke very eloquently, and I just appreciate the time that Rotary is taking for this issue on over and over and over again, because you're right, it will take us years to work through our own personal resistance and the resistance we see in our neighbors, and this is a really good start. Thank you.
so I want to be respectful of people's times. We've gone about 25 minutes with the questions. Cal, why don't you unmute yourself, and we'll let Cal thank Carolyn, and then I have a couple more poll questions. But I do want to let people know that I plan to keep the Zoom session open after we're done for anybody that just wants to hang around and talk. So Cal, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. This has been awesome. Evan, Joellen, Josephine, and I have collaborated on the planning of this particular meeting and some previous ones. And Carolyn, it was awesome. I was really excited when you met with the four of us via Zoom as we talked about this meeting, and have been really looking forward to the thoughts that you wanted to share on this very topical and very timely issue, this continuing conversation. And as others have already said regarding the comments, they were informative, they were insightful, and I like the challenging part of it, because you're putting it right out there. Rotarians, there are a lot of different things that we can be doing, and here's one particular area, and you painted the picture and you made it plain. And I hope that your specifics notes, I know that this is being recorded. I hope that those very specific notes in terms of action steps that you'll be willing to share maybe with Evan, and he can distribute them to us, because they're really marching orders, right? And if we do those things, I think it's going to make a tremendous difference. I see Joellen holding up a pad which indicates that
Some of them. I didn't get all of them.
she has taken some notes. So Carolyn, this was awesome. Thank you so very, very much. And we hope to be able to engage with you. And now that we've got this technology and we can reach you even when you're in Alaska, hopefully we'll be able to engage with you some other times going forward. This has been very, very excellent. And I'm very excited to be be a Rotarian, and know that there's a commitment to continuing these kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cal. Thank you, Evan. Thank you all for giving me this chance to speak to you. You know where to find me, and you know what? I turned 80 this year, And it's been many years that I've heard people say, America has got to have a conversation about racism. Folks, I'm tired of talking. Would you please do one thing? Just do something. And, journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Good night.
So here's a couple of questions. Oops, I got to launch it, don't I? Just 2 quick questions. If you want to go through and answer them. And while you're answering them, I just want to thank folks for attending. I want to thank Joanne and Cal and Josephine for going with me on this journey so far. And if other people want to, other Rotarians in our district or whomever want to get involved with future planning, future events, how do we carry this forward? Please reach out to one of us 4. It takes a bit to put something together, and it looks like very positive responses there to the poll, especially the future calls. We'll get together, and like I said, if anybody wants to step up and join us, you'd be more than welcome, and we'll take it from there. So anybody that wants to hop off the call is welcome to hop off, and those that want to stay on, we'll see how it goes. We can just have some open discussion. We can just see where the evening leads us, but don't feel obligated to stay on. We've been just shy of an hour, and I like to keep them right around there. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. Carolyn, thank you again. And I'll just say officially good night, and see who stays.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Get that out of my sight. Yeah, we're getting down to a manageable number. Heidi, you can unmute yourself. Anybody that's staying, feel free to unmute yourself. We'll just try to be polite-ish.
Polite-ish.
Evan, you and I are in a different group with Dryden and Groton folks.
Yes.
What I'd like to know is, what can we as Rotarians be doing now? I need suggestions. I feel like I'm not doing enough.
What I feel that I need to do, and not so much as a Rotarian, but as a privileged white male, and it's hard to force the situation, but just talk to other white people and say, have you been thinking about this? This is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm seeing. Where are you? And we just have to spread the conversation, and it can be hard. It can be challenging. But in my opinion, that's the best thing most of us on this call can do.
I second that. Look, I'm 67, almost 67 years old. I have been saying for years to many of my white friends, yeah, talk to black folks, talk to black and brown people, but talk to your white family, talk to your white friends, talk to your white co-workers, and talk very candidly. Very candidly. And Evan, Matt, thank you so much for bringing up October 6th. And I knew that Carolyn would respond, and I knew that there would be some other comments. But just thank you, Matt, for putting it out there. Because if you hadn't, and nobody else had, I certainly was. And so I really appreciate you doing that. Yep. And so, somebody talked about, Joel, and I think it was you that talked about talking to a cousin who doesn't understand or doesn't agree with white privilege and so on and so forth. And consistent with what Evan is talking about in terms of just talking to people, here's some issues. Where are you on that? Carolyn was right. If you look at the footage of what happens in Black Lives Matter type demonstrations or any demonstration of predominantly black and brown people, and you look at what happened on October 6th, and just ask this person struggling with understanding white privilege, what analysis do they make from that? And I think it would be pretty insightful to get a sense of an obvious example of white privilege, and I think Carolyn addressed that just superbly well. But there's so many opportunities to just ask where you are. You don't want to fight with them. You don't want to, beat them up or anything else. But just trying to, there's an old adage that ignorance can be fixed. right? Anybody who, ignorance in the sense of not knowing, right? Not knowing and really wanting to know. If people genuinely and authentically want to know, that ignorance of not knowing can be fixed.
You know, there's a
Let me tell
second
you what
part
the
to that,
second,
Cal.
let me tell you what the second part of that adage is, and I don't mean this to be offensive to anybody. The adage is ignorance can be fixed, comma, but stupidity is forever.
Mhm.
Right. And obviously I'm not calling anybody stupid or anything else, but there are a lot of well-meaning people who just don't understand some things that are crystal clear to a whole lot of other folk. And
Yeah.
so those are teachable moments. Those are teaching opportunities. Those are opportunities just to help us expand somebody's horizon. And so again, there's so many. This whole idea of talking to folk who look like you
Yeah.
can be revelational.
I'm going to put my friend Pete Williams on the spot and have him introduce himself and mention what we were doing this summer, as long as we're talking about what we can do.
Okay. This summer we had a lot of church people from Cortland and others would gather on Tuesday noontime to support the Black Lives Matter movement. We actually have a Black Lives Matter group in Cortland, as our town has. It's a rural county, but we have a state college in town, and our town is becoming more diverse every year. And so we would stand out on the corner, mostly white people, holding signs, Black Lives Matter. And a lot of people would go by and toot their horns in support. But every Tuesday, at least a couple people would go by and extremely angry, yell out the window, "All lives matter." And it's clear when you get someone like that, that to them, all lives do not matter. That's very clear. And I live in a county where you don't have to drive too far out in the country to see a Confederate flag flying. And I mean, and this is the North, so you know what that's all about. It's not somebody trying to be proud of their Southern heritage. It's a racist. And so we would get a few of those people. Once in a while, someone would swear at us. That happened a few times. And I think we got the finger a couple times. But most of the people in our town were very supportive of Black Lives Matter. So I think that's a hopeful sign. And
Go ahead, Harriet.
Harriet.
Okay, am I muted or unmuted?
You're fine. Yep.
Okay. Heidi, let's get back to your question. And you know, Rotaries all over the world, and not everybody's white. I'm a little late, and Matt, I apologize for this, but I will send to Cindy something. We have a hospital in Haiti, and our Cortland Rotary put in the incinerator 3 years ago when the hospital started. Now, and it was new. So now there are 58 Black Haitians that are employed, medical professionals that are employed, and the place is going gangbusters, and they want a fluoroscopy machine. So I'm going to go out to all the other clubs in our district and see if anybody wants to throw in a penny or two. And we'll get this fluoroscopy machine. So that we can do that too, because the white people are not really working there. They're teaching, but we've got 58 Haitians that are now employed there, and that's good.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Diane, you have to unmute.
Well, I see Carolyn's still on, so thank you for still sticking with us. And thank you very much, Evan, for bringing this program forward. My name's Diane Cohen. I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit here in Ithaca, New York, and we're like on a constant learning curve. We're trying to show that reusable materials are something that could actually support jobs and economic development and human self-empowerment, et cetera. And I kind of equate this, the discussion we just had around ignorance and stupidity. Unfortunately, thanks for bringing that up, Cal, because I think about it a lot. I think when we talk about ignorance, people don't, they don't separate ignorance from stupidity. And people, I think one of the tenors of the conversation that's happening all across the country, and probably the most positive thing about Donald Trump's legacy, is that we're having meetings like this. So I'm really grateful that this is now on the table. I've had social conversations with old friends where only in the last couple of years has racism even come up as a topic, in my white privileged circles. And I remember thinking, it was in the first year of Trump being president, I was like, there's a social ripple that's reaching areas that haven't been there before. But I think this topic around ignorance and our discomfort with talking about it, and I've struggled over the phrase diversity, equity, and inclusion over and over, even though I'm working as hard as I can to understand it as quickly as I can so I can integrate it as quickly as I can into the organization that we're trying to build. And I just watch the different where people are at, and it's all very different, and we're all on a huge arc of where we are in our own personal ignorance on this. So Evan, just thanks for bringing this up so we can have this type of conversation. And Carolyn, since you're here, I guess a question for what happened. We had a brief conversation right before you got on about engaging younger people. And so not only do we need to engage younger people, but Rotary and pretty much every organization in our county in upstate New York could be more greatly diversified. How do we start to build relationships and engage people of color, younger people? Do you have any suggestions? You, as a seemingly lifelong Rotarian, are there examples that are successful of reaching into communities and messages or strategies that we could use here at home to kind of build those relationships, to engage people in a really inclusive way?
Well, I believe in the human connection. And I think if you really want to engage kids, then, writing a check is fine, but actually being there and showing your face and being there on a consistent basis is what makes people think that you really care and that it really matters. So I don't, it could be, it could be that you engage in a reading program and you take turns and go to school and read to the kids. Or it could be that you sponsor an after-school basketball program and you're there coaching and delivering pizza after the game is over. Or as I suggested, you could partner with Boys and Girls Club and do an after-school tutoring program to help some of these kids catch up. There are many ways, but for me, if you want people to believe that you're genuine and put a face on your sincerity, is show your face.
Yeah, Carol, I'd like to follow up on that, because one of the gentlemen, I forget who it was, that spoke at our DEI the other night made a very good point of you got to be there where you got to be where they're at. And I've already talked to Cal a little bit about helping the Rotary clubs around Ithaca be where they're at, to find some of the festivals, some of the events that are the Black and people of color tend to be at more, and find some way to engage Rotary in that. So we get to see the people, be where they're at, and they get to see us a little bit too. Cal's first response was, well, how many are we going to get? But we'll see. I am noticing that this particular conversation right now is dominated by Ithacan Rotarians. And well, I'm frankly curious, because the vast majority of our clubs are so rural and so white that they don't have any people of color in their clubs. So maybe they have less awareness, less interest. I don't know.
We only have 5 in our club, Evan.
I know, and they're all here tonight.
Well,
Evan, one of the things that you and I have talked about is, this has been a difficult year to be district governor, as most people can imagine. But Evan and I have spent a lot of time talking, and Rotary is not supposed to be a political organization. We're supposed to stress inclusion. But I can tell you, I've had some real struggles this year listening to people. And to me, it's pretty clear cut what's right and what's wrong. But believe it or not, some of our fellow Rotarians, they don't know what's right or wrong. And that's been probably one of the more difficult parts of this year.
Yeah.
Well, I think our four-way test should give a pretty good indication of.
You think?
And I say that, Matt, in appreciation of the fact that you brought it up, because I think that those four questions are a really good gauge when applied to so many situations. And I would, anyway, I don't know. I don't know if you're shaking your head up or
No,
down.
I totally agree. I agree 100%.
But even the first statement, in the past 4 years, we've come to appreciate, what is the truth?
Right.
What's your truth? What's my truth?
Yeah,
Is truth
yeah.
subjective? What's a lie? What's science? So I'm an engineer, and there are some things that are that's the way it is. There isn't a perspective or a point of view. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these things in this topic, I have a tendency to just want to get in someone's face and say, no, that this is the way it is. It isn't your perspective or your belief. There's reality here.
Not you, Evan. You would do that?
Yeah, you can tell Matt and I have talked a lot. Bruce, you got something there, buddy?
Yeah, the question I asked this morning of the DGEs. Carolyn, what, by the way, excellent presentation today. Very powerful. As this coming year's district governor, we've been given a task to have a chairperson for DEI.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all they gave us. They did not give us any details on what that should include. Let me hear your thoughts on that person that's going to chair that committee and what they should be doing in July 2021 to July 2022.
Well, I think the
Sorry
first
to
thing.
get you blindsided on this, but
I'm not going to be the definitive answer, but I have a good starting point for you, which is the Rotary has established a DEI committee. And one of the things it's supposed to be doing is supporting clubs and districts in their efforts for DEI. So my first thought is you need to get in touch with Valerie Wafer, RI Director, and ask her where is that committee at right now in its work, and do they have anything, and when will they have something to give to clubs and districts, or do they have any thoughts for how you can get started this year?
Yeah, let me speak to that really quickly.
Yeah.
I actually reached out to Valerie and had
Okay.
a couple email exchanges, and her comment when I asked if one of herself or her committee could speak, she said, we're just getting started. We don't have anything definitive. There's not much to give you, maybe sometime in March. And then she gave me your name, Carolyn.
Yeah, she has handed out my name a lot, so I guess I'm the secret weapon till they get more organized.
Yeah,
I think we have to look at Google faster, because Carolyn would have been a good answer to it, but at the same time, we tried Googling it and we got not very, very little, to be honest with you, as far as where the direction to go.
Well, all right. Okay. So for you, for a club and a district, it's just like at RI, you're just getting started.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So, and I said earlier about starting the journey of the 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So those 3 words are big words. Each one by itself is a mouthful. I just look for a teeny piece of it to get started, just so you get started.
Yes.
And engage you all, and in the sense that this is an important subject, and we're here, and we're going to act and do something. And how about doing this little bit here? And we will continue gathering members. We will continue gathering ideas, and it'll grow.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. I did write, do something.
So to that, I would say that the presentation that we had last week,
Yes.
that was all inclusive in terms of other abled, people of color. That was such an amazing presentation that I probably feel like I need to watch it about 4 or 5 times to really understand the whole depth of what was offered and what was said that night, because everyone did a fabulous job.
Joelle, and I think what I'll try to do is rather than just send it to you, I'm going to send it to the entire district.
Yay!
Okay.
Because there's a lot of people that didn't make it. I mean, there were 200. I counted 202 people out of our 5 districts or whatever it was at one time at the most. And there were quite a few people from Ithaca, there, maybe a dozen, or from our district. But I was so amazed at the depth of understanding, and it was other abled, it was racism, it was equity, it was it covered, and people doing really good things. And I think that one thing we can do is to figure out how to be anti-racist. And so, that's one small part of that DEI part. But, to confront our biases, our unconscious biases, and, not scorn somebody in a wheelchair who has a stutter or who, is LGBTQ. I mean, it besides, the color range, it's all of those things, I think, is what Rotary wants us to address. And it's not going to happen overnight, unfortunately. But if we hear something, it's like, well, you see something, say something. If you hear something or someone says something or you see something, I think we all need to somehow learn how to gently approach something that we find to be racist or discriminating, or although it's hard these days.
Yeah.
But,
Harriet, I'm sorry, Harriet, you got something there?
In the not-for-profit, the theaters have spent a lot of time on this, and the Cortland Repertory Theater put me on their diversity task force. And somebody's already thought about it, and there's a lot of stuff there. Also, Evan, 3 of the 22 people were from the Cortland Rotary Club. That's 13.7%. So we're not Ithaca, but we count.
Yep. Heidi?
Rotary leadership is on my mind, RLI.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that comes to me is we're building, every 3 years we have a new curriculum. The most important part of the curriculum in leadership or in being a part of a group is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this should be one of the chapters in RLI. We learn how to talk about race. I was a diversity trainer in the 90s, and it's come a long way, and it's also taken a big step backwards. So I would like to see us being more proactive in RLI, let's say, just using that as an example. We can do it, but we have to talk about it. And the fact that we're talking on Zoom is one thing, but we need to have small group discussions when we get back into our clubs face to face.
Yeah.
Like having a table talk about this and a table talk about that. So we have better discussions.
Yeah. So my classmate Bruce mentioned, just a second, Kate, mentioned the request that we have a DEI committee at the district level. And there might be some people on this call, a PDG. Oh, Dave just went off, darn it. Oh, no, there you are, Dave Reynolds. PDG or...
The other Dave is gone.
Yeah. Or, so if any of you would be interested, I will be beating the bushes if Matt doesn't get something going first to get a DEI committee set up. And we, always looking for help. Kate, you were wait, and you're muted too.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, this idea of how do we engender interest and reduce resistance. I really think that we have to get our hearts in the right place before we can before our heads will engage. So this idea of being ignorant or stupid, it's really even goes deeper than that. It's like having your heart open helps you make the shift between stupid and ignorant so that you can then deal with it and learn the things that you want to learn about that you feel like you need to learn. So I think we really need to start with compassion. I think a compassionate person could hear someone like Carolyn say, in my life, or the people that spoke last week, in my life, when I was a child, these are the things that I faced. And then all of a sudden you say, no child should have to face that. That's a compassionate response. If you just give information, there's this many people who are below the poverty line, and this many are Black, and this many are white. That's a little different. That doesn't engage that compassion response. That's an intellectual response, and you can't really actually engage in that until you have open-heartedness. And one of the main things that keep us from having open-heartedness is shame. Because somehow if we hear it, we feel like it's us, our problem, white supremacy, white privilege. Somehow I'm responsible for this giant problem in America, and I don't even know what to do about that. And I'm being shamed into feeling like I should be able to solve the problem. And I think that what we need to do is pull back and talk about the emotions that come first and get us away through the emotions so that we can then begin to look at some of the intellectual side. So the emotion of shame is really a operative or guilt. And then people will say, well, I didn't have anything to do with slavery. And that's a rationalization to try to remove guilt. And what we need to do is find other ways, productive ways, to get people to break through the guilt and shame so that they can actually look at dispassionately, how has my being white been operative so that I can make advances in my own life that other people wouldn't have, with a different color skin, wouldn't have been able to make. And it's not about what I did wrong. It's about the way the system preferenced me because of the skin color I have. And, a very simple example in my life is I have 6 forebears who came after the Civil War. I can't say, oh, I'm not privileged because my people came after the slaves were freed. But what happened is six white males of my forebears each received free 160 acres by the US government, taken from the Native Americans. I don't have to feel guilty about that. That's just a fact. But that fact then built a generation of wealth. And that was my privilege. So if we can start talking about this in a more dispassionate way, what are those actual historical things that happened to you in your life? And maybe some families don't have that. Maybe some families have been challenged the whole entire generationally after generation after generation, and we might have a different approach for that group. But most white families in America have some actual factual experience that has impacted their wealth, whether it's the GI Bill, whether it's not having redlining, whether it's we can just name lots of them. Where are the places that white privileges happen in our society, and how has that been part of your family? You're not a bad person because this was part of your family, but this is part of your generational white privilege.
I just say, I don't know if we can't necessarily fix the past, but looking at just right now, you turn on the news every day with our vaccines, that when you look at the percentages of non-white people who are getting the vaccine versus white people, I mean, it's a huge difference. And what's happening? Why? And I think it's something that we really need to address in this country, especially during this terrible time we're living in right now.
Well, going forward, I think you're right. You can look at any factor, any measurement that's looked at in a demographic way, and you will see disparities. I'm a maternity care provider, and Black women die 4 times the rate of white women. And in New York City, it's 12 times the rate of white women for New York City. So we are facing this as institutional racism gone amok And we see that through how women can bear children. That's how bad racism is in our society. Just living in a racist society makes you more likely to die if you're pregnant. So we can start engaging in those facts and what we need to do to move forward. But I'm also addressing how do we get people who are unwilling to say all lives, Black Lives Matter. It doesn't mean your lives don't matter. It means that this particular group of lives have been disproportionately disaffected by how our social systems are structured.
Well said.
Yeah. Dave, you had something to say there, Reynolds?
Evan, you mentioned something